Last month, as I write this, BBC One aired an hour of television during which 15 members of the British and Irish public took turns pouring a barrel of sludge on one another. A barrel of sludge that, according to one contestant, smelled like off milk, but also a bit pooey. More than a tenth of the country was watching. Part 1. Television. The Traitors is a British reality TV game show, produced for the BBC by production company Studio Lambert, based on the Dutch show De Verraders that's recently concluded its third series. Set and filmed in Ardross Castle in the Scottish Highlands, contestants in The Traitors are secretly assigned one of two roles: faithful or traitor. To begin with, there are typically 20 or so of the former and 3 of the latter, and it's a social deduction game. Over the course of 12 episodes, the Faithful's task is to figure out who's a traitor and vote them all off in the nightly round table meetings, pun unintended, and the traitor's task is to kill Faithful off, one by one, and to deflect suspicion from themselves in the meantime. If by the time the game concludes there are any traitors left, they steal the whole prize pot for themselves. Otherwise, the victorious Faithful divide the pot between themselves. If you've ever played the party game Mafia, that's basically the blueprint here. Or actually, since this is the internet, you guys know Among Us, right? It's Among Us the show. Side note, given how Among Us is the cultural reference point for this type of experience, especially for the Traitors' younger players, together with the way you never hear anyone mention the game, the way you practically never hear any associated slang, people don't even say sus, I am convinced that behind the scenes, the show's producers are enforcing some sort of don't mention Among Us policy with an iron fist. That's not really relevant to the video, but it is, I think, very funny. Some of the enjoyment here comes from the show's colourful casting. The show does well at filling the castle with a mixture of competence and incompetence. Every second person has an inspiring or tragic backstory, performs a moral striptease in the words of one reality TV critic, and there are always a few genuinely odd ducks included to keep the viewer on their toes. Inexplicably, one of Series 3's contestants faked a Welsh accent day and night. But as with any social deduction game, the heart of the Traitors is the debating, the gossip mongering, the backroom whispering. That being said, there is another part of the show. The missions. Think tasks, but instead of cleaning O2 or fueling the engines, here it's carrying statues, or rowing your boat, or playing an off-brand version of Scabby Queen. Sometimes there are even rewards to be gained in the missions, primarily shields, which if won, protect the winner from being murdered that night. But despite being a necessary part of the show's structure, stressing the cast collectively repeatedly allows moments of trustworthiness or suspicious behavior to occur and be seen. This is where the drama at the round table comes from. The missions have always been the least popular element of the Traitors.
The Traitors US and UK challenges are boring.
Traitors fans want the challenges of real stakes and more exciting.
Series 3 seemed to realise this. While this year did kick off with a few snoozers, answering questions, collecting coins, and so on, as the episodes wore on, things started to get interesting, and never more so, I think, than in episode 6, with the so-called Ceremony of Truth. The sludge pouring thing from the intro. Host Claudia Winkleman takes the remaining 2/3 or so of the Traitors contestants out into the countryside and introduces the challenge.
If you all speak your truth, I will give you £5,000 for the prize fund. In pairs, you must secretly mark who you don't want to be protected from tonight's murder.
Standard mission structure is reversed. This time everyone starts with a shield, but players must take turns to pair up and mark one of their blindfolded fellow players, a player whose shield they wish to remove. That player then must guess who's targeted them, who's endangered their shield. If the marked player gets it right, they retain their shield and the markers lose theirs, but if they guess wrong, the victim loses their shield instead, and this continues until only 3 shielded players remain. These survivors retain their shields and end the challenge safe for the next 24 hours from murder. Victorious, in theory. Contestants Joe and Fozia are picked first, and attempt to decide a target based on existing suspicions. Fozia isn't convinced that Anna's recent actions are legit, so she proposes removing her shield, which they do. Joe and Fozia don't get caught, and Anna loses her shield. Next, Leanne and Alexander are picked, and they decide to de-shield someone who ought to be safe from murder anyway, attempting to minimize the challenge's potential damage to the faithful as a team. It's worth noting these two players will eventually make it all the way to the series finale. They mark Jake correctly, as it turns out he isn't high on the Traitors hit list, and get away with it. A few more players are marked and lose their shields: Freddy, Joe, Leon. By this point, the only glimpses of strategy we're shown have been team-oriented: who's a potential threat, who's already had a shield in the past, and so on. But then we get to Dan, who's paired with Leanne, and Dan has a different idea of who to pick.
For me, it was very important to get the shield. I feel like we have to go for Mina because we are both close to Mina. She will never suspect us.
By this point in the show, Dan and Leanne are both good friends with Mina. She's secretly a traitor, though that's not particularly relevant here, and she's also the contestant who'd had the most visceral reaction to the prospect of getting gooped at the challenge's start.
I'm in shock. I don't know if I can do this. I can't deal with, like, stuff in my hair.
But despite this, or rather because of it, Dan suggests they mark her.
I will not forgive whoever's done this because of my hair.
They get away with it.
Who doesn't want you to have a shield?
Dan, any suggestions?
Wasn't me.
You promise?
Promise.
Leanne,
I will go, Paul.
you promise?
I promise.
Was it you?
No.
Frankie?
That is incorrect.
For a moment after this, we're back to other contestants trying to make their choices more or less fairly. Lisa and Leanne pick Alexander because he's been in the game fewer days. But then Dan's picked to be the marker again, and he doubles down on the game plan. He marks another friend, Frankie.
My strategy was to go for people who would never, ever expect me to mark them. I knew that Frankie and I were close, so I was going to mark her.
She doesn't guess Dan did it either.
I was really cross for being marked.
After a couple more seemingly team-minded marking decisions from other players, the ceremony's over, and Dan walks away with his shield intact, protected from the night's murder. What made the ceremony of truth work was, obviously, the sludge. There is perhaps a more abstract version of this mission that could have been implemented instead, marking one another with tokens or the press of a button. That might even have been the way this mission would have played out in earlier years. But the reality of having a barrel of rank muck poured over your head brings emotions and grudges and trust into the picture in a way that remains theoretical, remains make-believe in some of the show's tamer moments. Typically, while players' strategies and attitudes during challenges are fair game for critique and speculation after the fact, Leon didn't seem himself after coming out of a ceremonial coffin. Maybe that means he's a traitor, that sort of thing. The basic completion of tasks on the traitors doesn't become personal. Players tend to understand that if someone does something, even does something to you in a challenge, the blame is better placed on the show and its producers. But the physicality of this challenge unravels that understanding. Before heading back to the castle, Dan seems to realize something of the above and seeks reassurance from his fellow victors.
Do you think everybody's going to be honest about who picked who?
Oh,
No.
No.
But back home, primarily among those who didn't walk away with a shield, we see an unexpected sight. Players owning up and apologizing to their targets. After hearing that Alexander, one of his partners in Goop, plans to come clean to their target...
Have you told her?
No, I think I probably will. Would that upset you? Would that make your life harder?
Not if you just said it about yourself.
Dan reiterates his individualist and entrepreneurial mindset.
I don't have to share everything with everybody. I lied to Frankie and I lied to Mina. Nobody is bound by any rules for any of these games. We can all do what we want.
Absolutely not. It's the game is the game is the game.
So, and I don't really feel guilty about it, to be honest. I got a shield.
Yeah, well done.
And Alexander's not alone. Dan's other sludge accomplice, Leanne, apologizes to their target, Mina, too.
It was being done. And I'm sorry. I genuinely didn't think that. No.
That actually really upset me.
No, I'm sorry.
I looked you both in the eye.
I know,
It's
I know.
sad.
I'm sorry.
In an interesting moment, we're then shown Mina, again a traitor, reflecting on this.
Me and Dan are day oneers, you know, he's my scout's brother, so I'm really disappointed in him. But I'm hoping that there's a chance of us sitting down and him naturally saying, I marked you.
Now, Mina isn't just a traitor. She's a very good traitor, one of the most careful and calculating the show's ever seen. You would expect her to relish the opportunity to sow discord here, but no, she is simply upset. Taking part in this show as a traitor necessitates a sort of double thing. Your co-contestants need to really be your friends and really be your targets, all at the same time. And while this could simply be a matter of the show's producers asking leading questions and editing around Mina's answers in order to spotlight the interpersonal drama angle rather than the strategy angle, this moment of reflection, conspicuously lacking in traitory scheming as it is, suggests Mina's feeling of betrayal is real, or at least as real as anything gets in the castle. That sense is only added to by the obviously strong emotions Mina had shown about the goop getting into her hair, and the instant, reflexive way she'd said the above after Leanne dropped her bombshell. Later on, Mina's strategic side will re-emerge, and she will target Dan with this information at the round table. But at this moment, this isn't just Mina the traitor realizing Dan has lost his trustworthiness and using that to stir the pot. It's also Mina the faithful, Mina his friend. What made the ceremony of truth work was obviously the sludge. But it wasn't just the sludge, was it? It was the interplay created between the sludge and the shield. The challenge's aftermath, as well as the episode's editing, frames Dan's strategy, that is, of going against the given instructions, picking his friends, those who'd be the least likely to finger him for the crime, most likely to allow him to get out with that shield, as cold, calculating, sneaky. But it is seemingly the most logical strategy. The contestants were presented with a game that seemed to fit a familiar template. A general prize for group participation, that is, money being added to the prize pot, alongside a limited bonus prize in the shields, and the seemingly straightforward protection they offer. So long as the prize funds aren't jeopardized in the process, then playing this new challenge in a way designed to maximize your chances of getting that murder protection would seem the correct choice for any faithful hoping to reach the final and win that money. That makes sense. Or it does, if the only thing you're worried about is murder. By this point in the Traitors Series 3, 5 players have been voted off at the nightly round tables. 5 players, all suspected of being traitors. 1 was, but 4 were not. This episode's mission dangled those shields in front of its players like so many golden carrots, and the prospect of not getting murdered once was so immediately appealing that the cost of this partial safety became obscured. That is, the trust of the other faithful. And it is a partial safety. Yes, a shield blocks the traitors from murdering you, but it doesn't stop the round table from voting you off. And later on, that's exactly what happened to Dan.
Dan, you have received the most votes and you are banished from the castle.
Dan's exit here makes perfect sense. For one, the truth behind his goopings had been dragged out.
Because it doesn't look great, and it's really like betraying my trust. I asked you like I'm staring in your eye now. And you lied.
And on a purely vibes level, knowing that someone's lied to your face repeatedly makes you wonder what else they could be lying about. But more importantly, even if he's not a traitor, he is a traitor. That is, maybe he is a faithful, but there are plenty of faithful left at this point, and only so many will still be there in a week's time. Do you really want to enter the finals with a teammate you know you can't trust? After the challenge, this subcurrent of trust versus distrust was spotted by some of the more perceptive players who'd gooped their unwilling friends.
It was me.
I know.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I took a decision to be transparent, to try and build as much trust as possible.
And as a result, these players managed to shrug off the odium the more individualist, game theory-oriented Dan couldn't.
I'm really sorry about that.
I really appreciate
So I'm sorry
That's
on that basis.
You know what? That's all I need.
In a very real sense then, the protection this challenge offered was a perverse incentive all along. Oh, hold on, let me just... There we go. That is a reward structure which leads to unwelcome results contrary to the expected. Here that's a shield promising protection, but which is best acquired by betraying friends and breaking trust, the very bonds responsible for keeping you in the game. To say that the Ceremony of Truth and its fateful shield system broke the Traitors, then, is not to criticize the game design, it's to praise it. It's to recognize that the show designed a challenge that led to one of the most trusted faithful blowing up his position of safety and success, all the while convinced that doing so was the right move. It's to recognize that this game stresses to breaking point the inherent contradictions of a reality TV game show like this, one where teamwork sits alongside self-interest in a way that struggles to resolve, struggles to even be seen most of the time. The only person you know you can trust is yourself, but despite this, your fate, your individual shot at the prize pot, lies in the hands of others. We see in a moment like the Ceremony of Truth what happens when a player tries to take that fate, that shot, into his own hands, listens to the language of disconnection and self-interest the show seems to be valorizing. He's sent home, back to his job, as a bank manager. Part 2. Reality. No media form is ever truly neutral. The novel developed hand in hand with the bourgeoisie. Landscape gardening started as a tool for politicizing place and legitimizing hierarchy. The Pentagon funds most action films. Or maybe funded, depending on when you're watching this? No media form is ever truly neutral, but reality TV, more than most, is a form defined by the political and economic logic of the systems producing it. One key reason, perhaps the key reason, for the proliferation of reality television over the past few decades is its profitability. After all, in some ways, the core of the reality genre is a stripping down. The genre infamously flourished during the 2007 writers' strike because of its unscripted nature. No traditional screenwriting is required for an episode of Survivor, after all, but this same principle also explains the initial appeal of reality TV, back as shows like Cops or America's Most Wanted were starting up decades earlier. Guy Redden, a professor at the University of Sydney, writes that
reality can be thought of as an industry innovation that includes ordinary people on terms amenable to the economic interests of media corporations, as free to cheap labourers for whom maximum on-screen value can be extracted, and as potentially lucrative cross-promotable celebrities.
In modern competitive reality TV, that value extraction tends to get disguised by the existence of a cash prize, and the illusion of equal exchange it creates. But in a journal article discussing Amazon's creative competition reality show Making the Cut, Aiden James Kosciesza points out that however big the prize may get, it remains a smokescreen. The house is always winning.
While Making the Cut's $1 million prize sounds like an enormous investment in the contestants, it is not without returns, which come in the form of surplus value produced on the show and appropriated by Amazon. And for the production company, any success enjoyed by the winner of the show can be connected to the creative competition experience, becoming a source of promotion and profit for the show. Performing uncompensated labor in a reality competition is presented as a prize in and of itself, because it affords the contestants attention and exposure, but this system naturalizes the precarity of cultural labor.
But this, the late capitalist logic responsible for the genre's proliferation, doesn't merely exist behind the scenes. Very often it's echoed in the final product. Jérôme Bourdon, writing in Framework, notes that
contestants in reality shows produce precisely what the service economy of capitalism is supposed to produce: interactions, contact, relations. And they have to do it in a public way, even more than in the workplace.
Reality TV is a form defined by the political and economic logic of the systems producing it, and that logic is the logic of neoliberalism. Per Kosciesza's article, neoliberalism is an ideology of free market rule pursued through policies of deregulation and privatization, a new era after the post-war labor-capital compromise in which market exchange functions as an ethic in itself, and where responsibility for social well-being is displaced onto the self-interested invisible hand of the market. And it's an invisible hand with an outsized reach. Redden, whose Betteridge's law-defying article Is Reality TV Neoliberal I quoted a minute ago, writes that neoliberalism pushes back on some collectively organized forms of social support and supports the extension of markets, and that crucially, this is a shift affected as much through culture as through bank or government directives.
These neoliberal market rationalities, issuing from a general philosophy of the social, are circulated across institutions, are made operative through numerous languages and mechanisms, and are productive of neoliberal subject positions that enact entrepreneurial self-responsibility.
As suggested above, cultural forms are among those mechanisms by which neoliberal logic is articulated and expressed, and so, as Redden summarizes, reality television is one conduit through which this has happened. In particular, the narratives generated in the game show subgenre of reality TV articulate the key neoliberal ideas of enterprise and competition, ideas we can sum up roughly with the words of Italian theorist and star of the Severance video, Franco Bifo Berardi.
Today, we are all capitalist, and therefore, we all have to take risks. Pensions will no longer be given in exchange for the savings accumulated thanks to a life of work, but they have to be tied to pension funds that will either produce fabulous revenues or fail miserably, leaving us destitute in our old age. The essential idea is that we all should consider life as an economic venture, as a race, where there are winners and losers.
The obvious point to make here, then, is that we see all of this in Dan's episode 6 performance.
I will be as cutthroat and competitive as I can be to get a shield. That's why I marked you today, and that's why I marked you, Mina, as well.
Like any good reality contestant, Dan has his sights set firmly on the prize, on the ultimate individual position of victory of enterprise Studio Lambert and the BBC have set up, the one at once constructing and constructed by the neoliberal logic running beneath the reality form. In the bank manager's eager transplanting of that neoliberal market philosophy of life, every man a wholly rational vector of self-interest, into the reality TV arena, transplanting the setup of the show and its form in courage, we see an almost too on-the-nose embodiment of the late capitalist assumptions the reality genre naturalizes. But the more interesting point is that episode 6 sees the traitors kind of reject that embodiment, right? Again, the other contestants double down on a more authentic, trust-based play, and for the reasons we discussed above, I don't think it's a stretch to say they are right to do so. Part of this is specific to the episode. Again, as we discussed in part 1, this challenge, the Ceremony of Truth, is designed to bring precisely the wrongness of a Dan-type player out, to bait them in with a promise of protection from the traitors that's best attained by destroying your standing among the faithful. But another part is wider. The Traitors isn't Big Brother or The X Factor or Love Island. It isn't a smooth, sanded down, purpose-built reality TV terrarium. Again, it's an adaptation of your Among Us, Mafia-type social deduction games. The basic structure here was not cooked up in a TV studio's offices by executives intent on producing more for less. The ludic seed that Studio Lambert grew into The Traitors has nothing to do with union-busting or ideals of personal enterprise. If anything, it's the opposite. For one, the original social deduction parlor game route here, a la Wink Murder, predates all that, and for another, the development of that basis into Mafia took place in Soviet Russia as a psychological research project before catching on in local schools. Per Wired, the game spread like wildfire around the globe precisely because of the way it bonded people together. When you play Mafia, or yes, Among Us for that matter, the good guys win instantly as a team if all of the sus imposters are caught. The foundation of this game is collective victory or collective loss. The guy who invented Mafia literally said that teamwork is how you win. Now, The Traitors is still reality TV, is adapting those party games into this inherently neoliberal form where more drama equals more product, and only the most worthy content volunteers can be permitted to claw back some of the surplus value they've created, so changes are made, and unsurprisingly, the biggest changes are made to the victory conditions. The major customization the Traitors makes is the removal of that automatic win condition. That is, the show's faithful are able to get it right, vote off every would-be murderer, but they must still play the finale through, voting more and more of the flock off with no confirmation as to their status until everyone trusts everyone else. Or, more likely, you run out of people and a final pair win or lose by default. And it's also worth considering that prize. You win money, but it isn't a flat rate, it's a share, one last ironic inversion of the Mafia-style game's collective basis. Since the prize pot is a relatively low one for a modern, multi-week game show, typically high 5 or low 6-figure amounts, potential winners are kind of incentivized to thin their team's ranks as much as possible. Thus, the pre-existing structure is given an individualist reality TV makeover, but even so, it remains an imperfect fit. Changing how the game is won doesn't necessarily change how the rest of it plays, and as such, an interesting tension remains. If those other, more streamlined reality shows reflect and express the neoliberal logic behind their creation straightforwardly, it's perhaps because they aren't building around pre-existing structures in the way a show like The Traitors is, are instead presenting ideal scenarios inside of sealed environments, spherical contestants in a vacuum, as it were. The games and the late capitalist logic they naturalize appear seamless. This is how people operate. This is how things are. In a case like The Traitors though, when the join is still visible, the graft only a partial success, things jut out, and that logic can be contested. Sometimes this is by the players, for instance in the wider shield meta that's developed. Most challenges that offer shields do so in secret. A faithful is able to gain protection for themselves without disclosing to the whole group that they're the one who's safe. Increasingly, one tactic being used is one faithful taking other trusted players into their confidence, revealing their shield, but only telling the wider group that someone in that smaller cadre has the shield. In theory, the Traitors could still try and murder one in their shield circle, but it's not really worth the risk. That tactic can backfire, but mostly it doesn't. And sometimes, as we saw with episode 6 and the Ceremony of Truth, that logic is almost able to contest itself. Again, stressing to breaking point those individualist, entrepreneurial assumptions that undergird much of the genre and many other parts of this show, in order to create an engaging challenge and a good episode of television. And this jutting out, the lack of a smooth join, shouldn't be a surprise. After all, in this ill-fitting, The Traitors reflects the truth of neoliberalism, its mirror object, more faithfully than any standard reality show. Our world is far nearer Ardras Castle than it is the Big Brother house. Regardless of what its advocates would have you believe, neoliberalism is not the proper end of history. This atomized rationality of freedom for capital and paralysis for everything else, this paradoxical anti-individual individualism, is not the default mode of being. In our world too, it draped itself over a pre-existing reality. In our world too, things jut out, no matter how much we're gaslit otherwise, no matter how much its exploitative features are disguised as bugs. I've called this video the game that broke the Traitors. But can you break what was never really whole? Part 3. Conclusion. The Traitors is not subversive leftist programming. By and large, it is simply another entry into an already stale canon, reproducing and naturalizing a lot of the same assumptions and ideals that gave rise to and maintain the reality form. But, to the show's credit, it does seem to recognize at points that there's something compelling in the tension that's created from the show's neoliberal gamifying of that social deduction template, that we like to see those parts that jut out. Over 1/10 of the country watched Dan pour sludge over Frankie, but they also watched Leanne apologize to Mina and mean it, not for strategic purposes, but because, traitor or faithful, she'd hurt her friend and she was sorry. competition and cooperation, self-interest and team play. A show like this is so captivating because it shows us people at their most and least trusting in a format where both of those conflicting realities are to some degree incentivized, are to some degree needed, and yet never quite gel. Over a tenth of the country watched the Ceremony of Truth, but a few weeks later, even more people tuned in to see Alexander talk about his late brother and wanting to give any winnings to MenCap, a charity supporting people with special needs.
My brother had special needs and used to go to like a summer camp, and I'd love to put some money their way to keep it going.
My brother had global developmental delay, which just meant he was younger than his age, and autism. He was 17 when he died, I was 24. He looked up to me and thought I was great, and I missed that a lot.
My parents did an incredible job with my brother, and for them to get a break for even a week, a year, looking after someone with special needs, which can be a challenging job, I thought was just a brilliant thing for my brother and a brilliant thing for my family, and I'd love to keep that kind of thing going.
Alexander ended up getting knocked out in the final, a casualty of that final runoff voting system, but in their thousands, the show's viewers donated to MenCap anyway, raising more than Alexander ever would have won, over £73,000 as of February. In a bizarre bleed-over from reality to reality, the audience ended up providing the show's moral payoff, themselves becoming a part of the Traitors' story, creating at once an immense amount of good and an immense amount of surplus value for the BBC and Studio Lambert. One final ill fit, one final contradiction the Traitors does not resolve. But that makes sense, right? How could we ever expect a reflection to do what its mirror object cannot? Hey, that's the video. Not totally sure why I made it really, but I hope you liked it. It's sort of a weird feeling writing about neoliberalism while watching its real-time degeneration overseas into both techno-fascist oligopoly and classic recipe fascism, but them's the breaks, I guess. Anyway, videos like this exist in great part thanks to the supporters you're seeing on screen now, so let's all thank them together, especially Hanan, Daniel Goldhorn, Something Capitalism Bad, Thomas R, and Weirdy Beardy. Every member on YouTube or Patreon is greatly appreciated and really helps me do this stuff. Bye.